You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your request for topics in the comments below. The Great Raid of 1840 goes down in history as the biggest attack by Native Americans on white settlements in what we now call the United States. This event came after the Council House fight, a confrontation where officials from the Republic of Texas tried to detain 33 Comanche leaders and their spouses under the pretense of a meeting. These leaders were supposed to hand over 13 white captives they had previously taken. However, disappointed by the low ransom received for a 9-year-old named James Putnam weeks earlier, the Comanches only brought a 16-year-old girl named Matilda Lockhart to the meeting. This move mirrored their past negotiations with other groups like the Mexicans and Santa Feans, aiming to get a better deal before releasing any other captives. The strategy, however, alongside the cruel treatment of Lockhart, escalated tensions. When the Comanches attempted to escape, revealing hidden weapons, the situation turned deadly, with all male Comanches being killed except for 2 elderly men. The women were taken captive. Angered by the deaths and capture of their people, the southern Comanche bands, united under Chief Buffalo Hump, organized a massive counterattack. They ventured deep into the territories of southeast Texas, where white communities lived, stealing horses and taking more captives along the way. The Pennateca's first war chief, Buffalo Hump, refused to sit back when faced with what the Comanches saw as a severe betrayal. He made it known among the other Comanche bands that he planned to attack white settlements in retaliation, leading to the infamous Great Raid of 1840. Alongside Buffalo Hump, the Pennateca's second war chief, Yellow Wolf, third war chief, Santa Anna, and Isamanica rallied at least 400 warriors. They were joined perhaps by as many as 500 women and young boys who provided support and carried out necessary tasks. That summer, they launched their assault on the settlements stretching between Bastrop and San Antonio. By mid-July, Comanches from every division, including the Noconi, Cotzoteca, Yamparica, and Quahati, were sweeping through Texas. The total number of Comanches participating in the Great Raid could have been as high as 1,000, all leaving from West Texas. This raid, possibly the largest organized attack by the Comanches up to that time, took them from the West Texas plains to the coastal cities of Victoria and Linville. They raided, burned, and looted these towns as they pleased. Meanwhile, the northern Comanche bands chose not to join the raid on Texas. Instead, they were conducting their own raid into Mexico, where they stole and kidnapped Mexican boys to serve as herders for future raids. On their way back, they also attacked the Lipan Apache and Tonkawa. A huge group of warriors entered central Texas and targeted the town of Victoria on August 6, 1840, marking the beginning of their attacks. Even though rangers had spotted the tracks of this massive group coming from West Texas and were closely following them, a segment of the warriors split off and launched a surprise attack on Victoria before the locals could be alerted. A resident of Victoria described the shock of seeing 600 mounted Comanches in the immediate outskirts of the village. The townspeople of Victoria took cover in buildings as the Comanches killed about a dozen people and roamed the streets. They eventually left Victoria as shots fired from the buildings posed a threat to them. This war party had plans to capture horses and raid the coastal towns, which were less equipped to handle such attacks compared to cities in central Texas. After their raid on Victoria, the Comanches set up camp for the night of August 6 at Spring Creek close by. On August 7, 1840, the Comanches set out from Victoria and made their way toward Linville. That night, they camped at Placido Creek on the ranch of Placido Benavides, about 12 miles away from their target. The next morning, they encircled the small port town of Linville, Texas, which was the second busiest port in the Republic of Texas at that time. They began looting the stores and homes in the area. Linville, now a forgotten place, used to be located 3.5 miles northeast of what is today Port Lavaca. During their raid, the Comanches killed 3 people, including the customs officer Hugh Orrin Watts. Watts lost his life because he went back to get a gold watch, a family treasure, from his house. His wife, Juliet Constance Watts, who he had married just 3 weeks earlier, along with a black woman and her child, were taken captive by the Comanches. The townspeople quickly realized that the Comanches were unfamiliar with navigating water, so they escaped to the bay. They found safety aboard small boats and a schooner captained by William G. Marshall. From their floating haven, they could only watch as their town was pillaged and burned to the ground. Throughout the day, the Comanches indulged in looting, setting buildings on fire, and even playfully dressing up in stolen top hats and linens. They went to the extent of binding feather beds and cloth bolts to their horses and dragging them around. They also rounded up a lot of cattle, penning and slaughtering them. An indignant Judge John Hayes even confronted nearly 1,000 Indians with an unloaded pistol after wading ashore through the shallow water shouting at them. The Comanches, amused and perhaps thinking him mad, spared his life. At the time of this great raid, Linville held a significant amount of trade goods en route from overseas through New Orleans to San Antonio and Austin, valued at over $300,000. This stash included, among other things, an undisclosed amount of silver bullion. Among the items looted were several cases of hats and umbrellas owned by James Robinson, a merchant from San Antonio. The Comanches, in a frenzied celebration, adorned themselves with Robinson's hats and danced around with his umbrellas as their town burned, creating a haunting and chaotic scene. After loading their plunder on pack mules, the raiders began their departure in the afternoon of August 8, 1840. They headed back with an impressive haul. Between 1,500 and 3,000 horses, 24 scalps, and half a dozen captives, marking the end of their massive and slow-moving caravan. The Rangers had been tracking a large group of warriors but couldn't confront them due to their numbers. It was the 3 days of raiding in Linville that allowed militia and ranger groups time to come together. Volunteers from places like Gonzales, under the command of Matthew Caldwell, and from Bastrop, led by Ed Burleson, joined forces with ranger units from across east and central Texas. They finally caught up with the Comanches at Plum Creek, close to Lockhart, Texas, on August 12, 1840. Usually, Comanches were known for their quick and lethal attacks, but this time, their speed was reduced because they were carrying captives and loaded pack mules, slowing them down from their typical fast retreat. Tonkawa scouts and rangers, led by Captain Henry McCullough, were the first to notice the Comanches heading towards a marshy area before Plum Creek, which would likely slow them down even more. McCullough saw an opportunity and requested permission to charge, which General Felix Houston approved. Suddenly, all chaos ensued. When the Comanches heard the charge, they tried to flee towards the mountains but struggled due to their slowed pace. In an attempt to protect their group, their women and elderly moved to the center, while the men defended from the sides. Some Comanche warriors, in efforts to cover their retreat, jumped off their mounts and fired from behind trees at the cavalry. Armed with revolvers and swords, Texian farmers pursued these snipers through dense smoke, while the main attack focused on the center. The Comanches left behind their loot and captives in a desperate attempt to escape. However, in a tragic turn, a Comanche warrior killed Mrs. Crosby and a black woman with a lance, refusing to let them escape. Another horrific moment was when a lady, identified as Mrs. Watts, was found trying to pull an arrow from her chest, her husband having been killed earlier in Linville. Amidst this, the Tonkawa chief, Placido, earned great respect for his bravery. Arriving on foot, he quickly took to a white horse previously ridden by a Comanche and joined the pursuit. Brown, a witness to the event, described Placido as tall, remarkably well-built, with a natural nobility, excellent riding skill, and a deep sense of honor. Placido's courage made him admired among those who knew him well, standing out as a truly brave man in Texas. The Texans managed to save the day by reclaiming the stolen goods. However, everyone knew that chasing the Comanche on horseback was a bad idea. When they returned, the women were in deep mourning, pulling their hair out in grief over the loss of nearly 40 family members, while the men considered how to retaliate. After their raid, the Comanche had left 23 defenseless people dead near Lavaca and ended up losing everything they had taken. William B. Deweese reflected on the experience a few days after the event. "We never found out exactly how many Comanches were killed, but it was definitely a high number. None of our men died. It might seem unnecessary for me to tell you about the horrors and harshness inflicted by these tribes, since you're probably already aware of the terrible stories involving our own settlements. But truly, you can't understand the extent of their brutality unless you witness it firsthand. The prisoners we saved from the Comanches were covered in wounds from the cruel treatment they received. We even found pieces of human flesh among their possessions, apparently prepared for cooking. Thinking about it sends shivers down my spine." One woman who was captured by the Indians shared that she was taken along with her 2 children. When one of her children couldn't keep up, an Indian killed the child in a horrific manner. Despite her immense grief, she couldn't protest or cry out. Not long after, her other child also showed signs of weakness and was killed brutally by the Indians. Imagine the mother's agony, forced to watch silently for fear of her own life. This account sheds light on the extreme experiences and the harrowing circumstances that unfolded, highlighting both the resilience and the tragic losses of the individuals involved. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.